November 1944. The air war over Europe has supposedly been won. The Luftwaffe is beaten, its back broken by years of relentless attrition. American bomber streams stretch for miles across the freezing pale blue sky, protected by swarms of Mustang and Thunderbolt fighters that roam like wolves, unchallenged. The Allied pilots believe they own the sky. They believe the war is simply a matter of time, a mopping-up operation against a dying enemy. But then, they see it. A shape that doesn't make sense. It cuts through the drone of the piston engines with a sound that has never been heard in combat before. It is a high-pitched, whistling scream, like the sound of tearing canvas, but amplified 1,000 times. It moves with a terrifying smoothness, lacking the vibration and struggle of a propeller-driven machine. It has no propeller. Its wings are swept back like a shark's fins, aggressive and alien. And it is moving at a speed that defies the known laws of aerial physics. It is the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It screams past the American escorts at 540 miles per hour. The American pilots react on instinct, slamming their throttles forward, their massive radial engines roaring in protest as they try to give chase. But the gap doesn't close, it widens. The German jet climbs away effortlessly, leaving the propeller-driven fighters gasping in its wake, suspended in the air like statues. In that freezing moment, every Allied pilot realizes a terrifying truth. Their planes, the pinnacle of 1940s engineering, are suddenly obsolete. They are flying relics in a jet-age war. The combat reports hit the desks of American commanders like a bomb. The Germans have a plane that is untouchable. Intelligence officers stare at the blurry gun camera photos in disbelief. If the Nazis can produce these jets in significant numbers, the bomber offensive and the invasion of Germany itself could stall. The entire strategy of the Allied air war relies on air superiority, on the ability to sweep the Luftwaffe from the sky. But you cannot sweep what you cannot catch. The Allies have their own jets in development, the British Meteor and the American P-80, but they are months, maybe years, away from being combat-ready in the numbers needed. They need a solution now. They need a plane that can catch a jet. But you cannot build a new plane in a month. You have to use what you have. And what they have is the P-47 Thunderbolt, a plane the British mocked as a flying milk bottle when it first arrived. A plane German pilots laughed at, calling it a pregnant cow because of its bulbous fuselage. A 7-ton monster of a machine that dwarfed the delicate Spitfires and Me-10-9s. The solution sounds insane. Take this Dinosaur, this flying tank, and turn it into a hot rod. Inject its heart with a volatile cocktail of water and alcohol. Boost the engine pressure until it is on the verge of exploding. The goal? To squeeze 2,800 horsepower out of an engine designed for 2,000. To make a propeller spin so fast it breaks the sound barrier. To catch the future by brute-forcing the past. This is the story of the P47M, the 2,800 horsepower gamble. To understand the magnitude of this gamble, you must first understand the machine itself. The P-47 Thunderbolt was never designed to be an interceptor. It was born from a panic in 1940, when the US Army Air Corps looked at the war in Europe and realized their current fighters were useless against the Luftwaffe. The man tasked with saving them was Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer. Kartveli was a visionary who didn't believe in the prevailing European philosophy of lightweight, nimble fighters. He didn't care about turning circles or dogfighting in a phone booth. He believed in one thing: power. When the army asked for a high-altitude fighter, Kartveli designed a monster. He built the plane around the engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine that produced 2,000 horsepower, a figure that was unheard of at the time. To the pilots of the day, Used to engines producing half that power, the R-2800 was a beast. But power at sea level wasn't enough. To fight at 30,000 feet, where the air is thin and engines suffocate, the Thunderbolt needed to breathe. So Kartveli installed a massive turbo supercharger system in the rear fuselage, with complex ducting running the entire length of the plane. It was plumbing on an industrial scale. The result was a plane that weighed 9,900 pounds empty, 65% heavier than its predecessor. It was huge, it was heavy, it was complex. When the prototype rolled out, it shocked everyone. By 1943, this dinosaur had proven itself. It couldn't turn with a Messerschmitt, and it couldn't climb as fast as a Spitfire, but it could dive. God, could it dive? Its massive weight became a weapon. In a dive, the P47 could reach speeds approaching the sound barrier, falling faster than any German piston fighter could hope to follow. It was an energy fighter. Climb high, dive fast, hit hard, and zoom back up using the momentum. But in late 1944, diving wasn't enough. The German jets didn't need gravity to go fast. They had thrust. The P47 needed to go fast in a straight line. It needed to sprint. The engineering challenge facing Republic Aviation was a problem of simple physics. To go faster, you need more power. To get more power from a piston engine, you need to burn more fuel and air in the same amount of time. To do that, you increase the manifold pressure, the pressure of the fuel-air mixture being forced into the cylinders by the supercharger. You cram more explosive potential into the combustion chamber. But there is a hard physical limit. If the pressure gets too high and the temperature inside the cylinder rises too much, the mixture doesn't burn smoothly. It detonates. It explodes violently and prematurely. This is called knocking, or pre-ignition. In a car, it's a rattle. In a high-performance aircraft engine running at redline, knocking is catastrophic. It acts like a hammer blow to the piston. It will melt the aluminum pistons, shatter the connecting rods, and blow the cylinder heads off in seconds. The engine will literally tear itself apart from the inside out. The R-2800 engine was rated for 2,000 horsepower. That was the safe limit established by years of testing. The engineers needed 2,800. They needed a 40% increase in power from the same basic machinery. They were asking the engine to perform impossible feats of endurance. How do you stop the engine from melting under that kind of stress? You have to cool it, but you can't just add more air vents or bigger radiators. That creates drag, which slows you down. You need to cool the fire itself, from the inside. The solution was a technology that felt like alchemy: Water-Methanol Injection. Engineers designed a system to spray a mixture of water and alcohol, methanol, directly into the engine's induction system, right into the throat of the carburetor. It worked on the principle of latent heat of vaporization. When the fine mist of water hit the hot intake manifold and the combustion chamber, it instantly flashed into steam. This phase change absorbed a massive amount of heat, instantly chilling the fuel-air charge. The alcohol was there to prevent the water from freezing at the freezing altitudes where the P47 operated, and to provide an extra kick of anti-detonant fuel. By chilling the mixture, two things happened. First, the air became denser. Cold air is heavier than hot air, meaning they could pack more oxygen into the cylinder. More oxygen meant they could dump in more fuel. Second, and more importantly, the cooling effect stabilized the combustion. It prevented the catastrophic pre-ignition. Because the mixture was cooler, the engineers could crank the manifold pressure to dangerous, unprecedented levels without triggering the deadly knock. It was a war emergency power setting on steroids. A wet setting. When the pilot flipped the switch, the fluid would rush into the engine. The manifold pressure gauge would spike. The engine would go from a deep roar to a high-pitched, tearing scream. The horsepower would jump from 2,000 to 2,800 in a heartbeat. It was like injecting adrenaline directly into the heart of the machine. But there was a catch. There is always a catch in engineering. The consumption was horrific. In normal crews flying back from a mission, a P-47 burned about 100 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel per hour. With the water injection engaged, fighting for its life against a jet, the Thunderbolt became a glutton. It guzzled fuel at a rate of 300 gallons per hour. The fluid tank for the water-methanol mixture was small. It became a flying gas tank with a limited fuse. A pilot engaging the system had minutes, not hours, to win the fight. If he ran out of water while running at high pressure, the engine would detonate instantly. If he ran out of fuel, he was a glider. It was a system built for a sprint, not a marathon. Republic Aviation took this souped-up, hot-rodded engine and built a new variant around it, the P47M, the Sprint Thunderbolt. They took the standard P47D airframe and stripped it down. They removed underwing pylons to reduce drag. They refined the aerodynamics. But the most visible change was at the front, where the power met the air. To harness 2,800 horsepower, a standard propeller was useless. A standard prop designed for 2,000 horsepower would simply spin faster and faster without biting the air, losing efficiency to slippage. It would be like a car spinning its tires on ice. They installed the paddle blade propeller, a massive Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller, 13 feet in diameter. These weren't the elegant tapered blades of a Spitfire. These were broad, square-tipped slabs of metal that looked like giant oars. They were designed to grab huge chunks of air and throw them backward with violence. They allowed the engine to transfer that raw, increased horsepower into thrust. But they also created a signature side effect that added to the psychological terror of the machine. The tips of these 13-foot blades, when spinning at full takeoff power or in a high-speed dive, were moving so fast they broke the speed of sound. They went supersonic. This created a continuous sonic boom that radiated outward from the propeller hub. The Germans on the ground called it Donnerschlag, Thunderclap. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Messerschmitt or the smooth drone of a Mustang. It was a deep, terrifying, metallic roar that vibrated in the chest of anyone standing nearby. It sounded like the sky was being torn apart. It was a sound that announced the arrival of the ultimate piston fighter. The result of all this tinkering, this injection of poison and water, this aerodynamic refinement. The P47M could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet. It was fast. It was the fastest propeller-driven fighter the Army Air Force would ever deploy in numbers. It was fast enough to make the German jet pilots sweat. In early 1945, these new hot rods were deployed to the 56th Fighter Group, the famed Wolf Pack. Their mission was specific, dangerous, and unlike anything they had done before. Hunt the jets. The pilots knew the math. They weren't stupid. Even with 2,800 horsepower, the P47M was still slower than the Me 262, which could hit 540 miles per hour in a straight line. If the German pilot pushed his throttle and flew straight and level, he would escape. Physics was still on the side of the jet. So the American pilots had to be smarter. They had to be hunters. They couldn't just chase. They had to trap. They studied the intelligence reports on the Me 262. They learned that the early jet engines, the Jumo 004s, were fragile and temperamental. They had poor acceleration at low speeds. The pilots couldn't slam the throttle forward like a piston pilot could. If they did, the jet engine would flame out or catch fire. And most importantly, the jets couldn't turn tight without bleeding off their precious speed. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, developed the tactics. "We catch them when they are vulnerable," Bostwick told his men, on takeoff, on landing, or when they slow down to attack the bombers. The jets had to slow down to line up their shots on the B-17s. That was the window, and the Americans had one other advantage that the jets couldn't match: gravity. The P-47 had always been a diver. It was heavy, dense, and aerodynamic. But the P-47M, with its clean lines and massive weight, fell out of the sky like an anvil dropped from a skyscraper. In a dive, the P-47M could reach speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, flirting with the sound barrier, the controls stiffening as the air turned to concrete. If a P-47M pilot could start above a jet, he could convert that altitude into raw kinetic energy, crashing down on the enemy before the German pilot even checked his mirror. This was the bounce. The ultimate test of man and machine came in March 1945. Major Bostwick was patrolling in his P-47M, scanning the horizon for the elusive Swallows, the German name for the Me-262. The sky was tense. The bomber stream was miles away, a magnet for the jets. Then he saw them, a flight of Me-262s streaking in to attack the heavy bombers. In a standard fighter, this would be the moment to turn away, to accept that you couldn't close the distance. But Bostwick had the water-methanol switch. He had the sprint plane. He engaged the system. He felt the kick as the fluid rushed into the cylinders. The 2,800 horsepower kicked in. The engine screamed its high-pitched wail. The paddle blades bit into the thin air, churning it into thrust. Bostwick positioned himself high above the jets, hoarding his potential energy. He watched them line up on the bombers, slowing slightly to aim their cannons. This was the moment. Bostwick rolled his massive fighter inverted and pulled the stick back. The P-47M dropped. The acceleration was violent. The airspeed indicator wound past 450, 470, 500 miles per hour. The airframe shuddered under the stress, but Kartveli's Dinosaur was built like a tank. It held together. Bostwick was moving fast enough to catch the future. As he closed the distance, the German pilots likely didn't see him until it was too late. They were relying on their speed for protection, confident that no propeller plane could touch them. They were looking for Mustangs, not this diving monster. Bostwick lined up his sights on a Me-262. He was flying a relic of the piston age, but he was armed with 850 caliber machine guns that poured out a solid stream of lead. He squeezed the trigger. The P-47M shuddered as the guns roared, spewing armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The heavy bullets slammed into the fragile jet. The Me-262 was built for speed, not durability. Its engines were exposed, its fuel tanks vulnerable. Bostwick's combat report was clinical but devastating. He noted that while the jets were faster, they were brittle. The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. He wrote, "One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper." He watched as the advanced German technology disintegrated under the brute force of American firepower. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage, he reported. The German pilot, trapped in a disintegrating machine, did not escape. Bostwick shot down 2 Me-262 jets in that single month. Other pilots in the Wolfpack added to the tally. It was a vindication of Alexander Kartveli's design philosophy. The Americans hadn't tried to build a delicate high-tech interceptor to match the Germans. They hadn't tried to be elegant. They had taken a heavy, rugged airframe and pushed it beyond its limits with sheer engineering audacity. They proved that a piston engine, pushed to the edge of destruction by water and alcohol, could still kill the technology of the future. The P-47M was the final evolution of the Thunderbolt. It was a machine built for a specific fleeting moment in history, bridging the desperate gap between the propeller age and the jet age. It was a gamble that paid off. The German jets were technological marvels, precursors to the modern age of aviation, but they were few, they were unreliable, and they were flown by men with little training. The P-47s were built by the thousands, fueled by the endless resources of the American industrial machine, and flown by pilots who knew exactly how to use their dinosaurs to hunt. When the war ended just a few months later, the P47M faded quickly into history. It was scrapped, replaced by the very jets it had hunted, like the P-80 Shooting Star. The era of the piston fighter was over, but for a few critical, freezing months in 1945, the sky belonged to the Sprint Thunderbolt. It was the fastest, loudest, and most terrifying piston fighter ever to fly. It was the sound of a Donnerschlag that announced the end of the Luftwaffe. It was the sound of 2,800 horses screaming in unison, chasing down the future and tearing it apart.